On a chilly December day in 1872, a battered brigantine sailed into Gibraltar's port with just 3 men aboard. These sailors had discovered the Mary Celeste adrift in the mid-Atlantic Ocean and salvaged the vessel from the sailing ship Dei Gratia. The fate of the ship's captain, his family, and the 7 other crew members remains an enduring maritime mystery. While ships vanishing at sea wasn't entirely uncommon, from well-known vessels like the Collins Liner Pacific to countless smaller craft lost to the waves, the Mary Celeste's case was unique. What made this incident extraordinary was the complete disappearance of the entire crew without any signs of struggle or violence, leaving the ship in remarkably good condition and seemingly ready to continue its journey. This maritime enigma has captivated storytellers for generations, inspiring countless retellings and speculations. Now, on the 150th anniversary of the vessel's discovery, we're diving deep into its true history beyond the ghostly legends and sensationalized accounts. The story begins in the Bay of Fundy, a region renowned for its extreme tides and rich shipbuilding heritage. From the early 1800s, over 1,000 ships were built here, mostly humble coastal schooners that navigated local waters. Remarkably, nearly 100 of these vessels would eventually vanish without explanation. In 1860, a local Nova Scotia shipbuilder named Joshua Dewis from the town of Economy began crafting smaller schooners. These vessels were designed to transport goods between the marketplaces around the Bay of Fundy. Through years of research, I've strived to cut through rumours and second-hand stories. While I can't claim absolute perfection, I've drawn from first-hand accounts to present the most accurate narrative possible. The facts have been obscured over 150 years, but the truth remains compelling. Shipbuilding around the bay was constantly evolving, and by 1860, Joshua Doe was looking to relocate and expand his craft. He moved from Economy to Advocate Harbour near Cape D'Or, seeking a new location for his shipyard. While Advocate Harbour was already known for shipbuilding, the nearby town of Spencer's Island offered some unique advantages. Despite its name, Spencer's Island is actually a mainland town named after a nearby island. Its location provided protection from the storms that often battered the exposed coastal town of Advocate as it sat on the sheltered side of Cape D'Or. The area was also rich in timber, unlike Advocate, where much of the surrounding land had been deforested. The timber resources were particularly abundant, the forests extending right to the shoreline. When the first vessel's frame was being built on the beach, yard workers could hear lumberjacks harvesting timber nearby. This tight-knit community was mostly connected through family ties, with the majority of nearby woodlands owned by 2 brothers, Jacob and Isaac Spicer, who lived in Spencer's Island. A family connection proved crucial to Dewis's plans. His wife and Jacob Spicer's wife were sisters, which helped him convince the Spicers to invest in his shipbuilding venture. They agreed to supply lumber in exchange for a 1/8 share in the first vessel. In the fall of 1860, the keel of this first vessel was laid, with plans to launch during the high spring tides. The new shipyard was primitive and simple. Their first vessel was truly built by hand during the harsh Nova Scotian winter. They had no mill to convert trees into planks and beams, so all timber was shaped using only axes and saws. Schematic plans were minimal, and the yard lacked even basic crew accommodations like bunkhouses. H. Bigelow owned a 1/16th share of a new vessel, and his house became a key part of the shipbuilding process. Shipyard workers didn't stay in separate quarters, but instead lived right in the captain's home during construction. A house accommodated not just the workers, but also the family and their maid. By early December, the ship's basic structure was taking shape. The keel was laid, and the ribs were in place. This framework would be left exposed to the winter elements, a deliberate strategy to season the wood. The cold months allowed moisture to escape from the timbers, ultimately strengthening the ship's frame. During the workers' seasonal break, Dewis and the Spicers gathered materials needed to complete the vessel in the spring. When warmer weather arrived, they finished the hull, coating it in salt to dry the wood before caulking and final preparations. Sails were imported from either Halifax or Windsor. This vessel, the first from the Spencer's Island yard, would later become the legendary Mary Celeste. However, at her launch, she was known as the Amazon, a name personally chosen by Joshua Dewis While ships are traditionally referred to in the feminine, Dearest might have drawn inspiration from the fierce Amazon women of Greek mythology, though he never confirmed his reasoning. Contrary to dramatic retellings, the Amazon's launch was smooth and uneventful. No slipway mishaps or injuries occurred, a fact attested to by spectators, owners, and builders alike. The Age of Sail Museum in Port Greville, Nova Scotia, preserves posters from later vessel launches, offering glimpses into the celebratory traditions. These events typically concluded with an afternoon tea and a rummage sale, marking the community's maritime traditions. Spencer's Island was home to a bustling shipbuilding industry in its early days, with nearly 30 ships constructed at the local yard. Today, little physical evidence remains of this maritime heritage, though some remnants persist. The foundations of a pier from the late 1800s are still visible, marking where ships would unload goods for the yard and nearby general store. A mill was also built, and its base pilings continue to stand. A few buildings from that era survive, including the homes of Mr. Ferrier, Bigelow, and Frederick D. Wolfe, the shipyard's blacksmith. Among the vessels built here was the Amazon, a brigantine that represented both hope and potential for the local shipbuilding industry. Measuring 99 feet long, with a breadth of 25.5 feet and a gross tonnage of 198.5 tons, she was considered one of the larger ships in the Bay of Fundy at the time. Registered in Parsbro, Nova Scotia, the Amazon began her voyage under the command of Captain Robert McClellan, a recently married man who hoped the sea air might improve his health. The ship was bound for 5 islands to load lumber for a transatlantic journey to London's River Thames. However, McClellan's health quickly deteriorated. Before the Amazon could even clear the Bay of Fundy, he developed pneumonia. The first mate turned the ship back to Spencer's Island, where McClellan was carried to the home of shipowner Jacob Spicer. Tragically, the young captain died shortly after. McClellan's body was then loaded back onto the ship, which sailed to Economy, his home port. This unfortunate beginning marked the start of what would become a bizarre and unlucky career for the Amazon, despite the initial promise of the shipbuilding enterprise. In 1861, the Amazon returned to the wharf, bringing with it a deeply tragic story. The ship's first captain, McClellan, had passed away, and his widow rushed to the shore upon the vessel's unexpected arrival. The crew would forever remember this heartbreaking moment. Captain McClellan was laid to rest in the nearby Economy Cemetery, where his grave can still be found today. Jack Parker stepped in to take of command, preparing to continue the ship's journey to London as originally planned. Before crossing the Atlantic, the Amazon stopped in Eastport, Maine at the Bay of Fundy's mouth. Here, it became entangled in fishing wires and was forced to anchor for several days while repairs were made. The subsequent journey to London proceeded without incident, with the ship discharging its lumber cargo and taking on a new shipment bound for Portugal. Sailing down the River Thames and into the Strait of Dover, the Amazon unexpectedly collided with a British brig. The brig began to sink rapidly, with its crew abandoning ship. After determining the Amazon could stay afloat, the brig's crew was rescued and brought aboard. They were later dropped off in Dover while the ship underwent further repairs. The cargo was delivered to Lisbon, and the ship continued to Marseille in November 1861. An early image of the Amazon, reportedly painted by local maritime artist Honoré Pellegrin, was created during this time in Marseille. For years, the ship travelled the Atlantic and Mediterranean, trading goods from the West Indies and frequently returning to Nova Scotia under the command of Captain William Thompson. In the fall of 1867, the Amazon transported a corn cargo from Baltimore to Halifax, docking along the waterfront. During Thompson's command, the ship's owners from Spencer's Island grew increasingly dissatisfied. While docked in Halifax, they sent notice to Captain Thompson to hold the ship, marking a turning point in the vessel's history. In November, the treacherous winter storms around Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, set the stage for a dramatic maritime. The Amazon's insurance policy was crystal clear: no sailing near Cape Breton after November 1st due to the extreme dangers. Captain Thompson was about to be replaced, and one of the first actions he took was to discharge George Spicer, a crewman who was the son of an investor. After receiving notice of his impending relief, Thompson sailed the ship without cargo to Big Glace Bay, anchoring and waiting for a coal shipment. A powerful winter gale allegedly drove the Amazon onto the beach. Thompson reported extensive damage to the ship's owners in Spencer's Island, claiming expensive repairs would be necessary to refloat the vessel. However, the insurance company refused coverage, citing the explicit warning about sailing in the area after November 1st. With no alternatives, the owners abandoned the ship. Suspiciously quickly, Alexander McBean claimed ownership, registering the vessel in Sydney, Nova Scotia. This raised eyebrows because Nova Scotia law required ships to be seaworthy for port registration. Within a week, the Amazon was not only registered to a new port but also purchased and re-registered. Swift transfer suggested the ship was in far better condition than Thompson had initially reported. Many believed Thompson had orchestrated an underhanded transaction with McBean, effectively scamming the original owners out of their vessel. The loss devastated the Spencer's Island community, who bitterly referred to the Amazon as the ship that forced them to eat with tin spoons. McBean subsequently sold the ship to John Beatty, who owned it for less than a year before it wrecked in May and was abandoned once more. After the wreck was recovered and brought to New York for a public auction, Richard W. Haynes bought the ship for $1,750. As a foreign vessel being imported to sail under the American flag, Haynes was required to pay import duties to register the ship. Instead of following the rules, he simply gave the ship a new name, the Amazon, hoping to avoid detection. When confronted about skipping the import fee, Haynes crafted an elaborate defense. He claimed he had complete. Eli rebuilt the ship, replacing the keel, stern, and most of the hull. His argument was that the repairs cost more than twice the original construction, essentially making it a new vessel. Historians have long debated the truth of his statements. The new name he chose was the Mary Celeste, which means Heavenly Mary or Mary of Heaven, though the reason behind this choice remains unclear. Haynes became the ship's captain but struggled financially, sinking deeper into debt. Within 10 months of his purchase, the ship was seized for a sheriff's sale. James Winchester, a former sea captain, purchased the Mary Celeste. Interestingly, his life mirrored the ship's journey. Born in Nova Scotia, he moved to Eastport, Maine, became an American citizen, and eventually settled in New York City, which would become the Mary Celeste's home port. Soon after acquiring the ship, Winchester was visited by a deputy surveyor who revealed the fraudulent nature of the previous registration due to unpaid import fees. The surveyor suggested Winchester could avoid legal trouble by paying the fees immediately. Winchester recognized this as blackmail and challenged the surveyor's tactics. The survey ultimately decided to pursue the case and attempted to legally seize the vessel, setting the stage for further complications. Winchester battled legal challenges and ultimately prevailed. The aftermath revealed deeper issues with the ship. Despite Haynes's claim of spending $8,000 or $9,000 on rebuilding the vessel a year earlier, Winchester discovered the Mary Celeste was actually in terrible condition, requiring a near-complete reconstruction, costing $11,500. The overhaul was extensive. The ship was stripped down to the waterline and rebuilt, with an additional deck added and slight modifications to her rigging. Her tonnage increased from 198 to 282 tons. This significant renovation drained Winchester's finances, leading him to sell a third of the vessel to Benjamin Briggs, the Massachusetts captain who had also become the ship's commander. Briggs was a quintessential American, his lineage traced back to Mayflower settlers and Revolutionary War veterans who fought near the conflict's initial battlegrounds. A devoted family man, he hoped to bring his wife and daughter on this voyage. Sarah Briggs, his childhood sweetheart, and their children would partially join the journey. 8-year-old Arthur would remain with his grandparents, while 2-year-old Sophie would accompany her parents. The Mary Celeste would carry 10 souls on this Atlantic crossing: Captain Briggs, Sarah, Sophie, and 7 crew members. The crew represented a diverse mix. Albert Richardson from Maine served as first mate, Andrew Gilling from New York as second mate, and Edmund Head, also from New York, worked as cook. Like the ship's first captain, Robert McClellan, Head had recently married. The remaining 4 crew members were Prussian sailors, brothers Volkert and Bos Lorenzen, Arian Martins, and Gottlieb Guldshaw. Briggs viewed the Prussian sailors as capable but not particularly intellectual. A ship's cat also travelled aboard, dubbed Poo-ah-Poo by young Sophie, though the reason for this name remains unclear. Mary Celeste rested at Pier 50 on the East River, located at the foot of Barrow Street through October and into November of 1872. The pier would later be renumbered during the early 1900s, rebuilding of New York City's waterfront. While moored, the ship became a temporary home for the Briggs family. With his wife and daughter aboard, Captain Briggs created a warm, intimate environment. They brought along a melodeon and would play music, write letters to friends and family, and even hosted Sarah's brother and his wife. Despite the comfort, Briggs often vowed fight about his absent son, contemplating sending for him and allowing him to skip the remainder of the school year to join the voyage. Meanwhile, 1,701 barrels of alcohol were carefully loaded into the ship's hold, positioned on their sides with wooden wedges, preventing them from rolling. Alcohol was known to be a particularly dangerous cargo, with potential risks from improperly vented fumes. On Tuesday, November 5th, the Mary Celeste prepared to set sail but was delayed by winds and fog. Captain Briggs anchored off Staten Island for 2 nights, during which time Sarah wrote a final letter to her mother-in-law. 2 days later, with weather conditions improved, they raised anchor and ventured into the Atlantic. Nearby in Hoboken, New Jersey, another vessel prepared for a similar journey. The Dei Gratia, a ship with comparable construction and a Latin name meaning the grace of God, was bound for Genoa. Built in Bear River, Nova Scotia, she retained her Nova Scotian registration and crew, commanded by Captain David Morehouse. Though rumoured to be friends with Captain Briggs, this connection remains unconfirmed. The Dei Gratia departed on November 15th, carrying a petroleum cargo, 8 days and 1,200 miles behind the Mary Celeste. The seas were brutal from the start, with storms battering the ships and winds whipping across the waves. Rain poured down, and massive swells tossed vessels like toys. Mary Celeste and Dei Gratia both endured harsh conditions, struggling through each relentless day. By November 25th, about 20 days into their journey, the Azores Islands came into view. The 10 people aboard the Mary Celeste were thrown about inside the ship, along with their volatile cargo. The vessel creaked and groaned under the immense pressure of the storm. The Dei Gratia and Mary Celeste took slightly different routes, with one sailing south and the other north of the Azores, but eventually their paths would cross. On December 5th, Captain Morehouse spotted something unusual. Sails about 5 miles away, approaching slowly. Something was clearly wrong. Through his glass, Morehouse saw an empty deck with no one at the helm. The sails hung unkempt and the ship drifted erratically. Despite multiple attempts to hail the vessel, no response came. Determined to understand what had happened, Morehouse ordered his first mate, Oliver DeVoe, second mate John Wright, and seaman John Johnson to investigate. They carefully approached the mysterious ship, with Johnson remaining in the rowboat while DeVoe and Wright boarded. What they found defied explanation. Contrary to popular dramatic retellings, the ship was not perfectly maintained, nor were there hot meals waiting on the table. The sails were tattered and hanging in disarray, telling a story of abandonment and struggle. The true account, as originally reported by the Dei Gratia's crew, would reveal a mystery that would captivate imaginations for generations to come. Something had happened to the Mary Celeste's crew, but the exact circumstances remained unknown. The Mary Celeste was found in a peculiar state. Parts of the ship showed signs of hasty disarray, with a section of railing on the port side missing. No one was aboard, not even the ship's cat. First Mate DeVoe's initial check confirmed the ship's pumps were working perfectly. Yet, 3.5 feet of water sloshed inside the holds, and the cabins were completely soaked. Windows on the deck, houses were boarded up and covered in canvas, suggesting the crew had prepared for stormy weather. Curiously, the cabin skylight remained propped open, likely the source of the water damage. The beds of the captain and his family looked recently used but unmade, unusual for Sarah Briggs, who typically kept things tidy. This suggested he crew had left the ship early in the morning, shortly after waking. A haunting detail remained. The clear impression of a 2-year-old Briggs girl was still visible on her bed. Nearly all personal belongings of the captain, his family and crew were left behind. The Lorenzen brothers' possessions were absent, but this was due to an earlier shipwreck. The ship was well provisioned, with enough food and water to complete the voyage. Nothing substantial seemed missing, only items naturally consumed during the first few weeks at sea. The ship's log was meticulously maintained, with entries up to November 24th, just 10 days before the ship's discovery. A log slate showed the beginning of a November 25th entry. When Captain Morehouse and his crew from the Dei Gratia discussed the abandoned vessel, their conversation centered more on potential salvage rewards than concern for the missing crew. This suggested a lack of personal connection between Morehouse and Captain Briggs. First Mate Devoe knew the Mary Celeste could sail again. Though they couldn't tow the ship to port, Captain Morehouse trusted Devoe's assessment and left him in command with 2 men, some navigational tools, and whatever provisions were available. Within hours, Devoe and his crew had the ship functional. The Dei Gratia continued to Gibraltar while the Celeste prepared to follow. By evening, the ship was underway, pumped out, and with replacement sails found on board. As the new captain of this mysterious vessel, Devoe maintained the ship's log for the voyage to Gibraltar. In the process, he inadvertently erased Captain Briggs' handwritten notes for November 25th, now lost to history forever. Another storm forced the Celeste to wait an extra day before entering the Strait of Gibraltar, just 1 day behind the Dei Gratia. Remarkably, a small crew of 3 men had repaired a derelict vessel at sea, sailed 600 miles through challenging conditions, and brought her safely to port, an extraordinary achievement. The ship was immediately seized pending investigation into the crew's disappearance. The Dei Gratia crew stood ready to claim salvage rights. Like countless people over the next 150 years, investigators struggled to understand how a perfectly sound vessel could be abandoned mid-ocean with no signs of struggle or imminent danger. A thorough investigation revealed the Mary Celeste was indeed in near-perfect condition. During their search, they found a sword under Captain Briggs's bed. While some claimed it showed signs of blood, chemical tests proved otherwise. The sword was simply rusty. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged attempting to explain the mysterious abandonment of murder was one speculation raised during the initial investigation and has persisted through decades of speculation. Yet the true reason remains an enduring maritime mystery. The mystery of the Mary Celeste has sparked numerous theories about what might have happened to its crew. Some have speculated that Captain Winchester hired the crew to kill Briggs and his family for insurance money, but there's no evidence to support this claim. In fact, the absence of any signs of struggle makes such a theory highly improbable. Another theory suggests the Dei Gratia crew sailed to the Azores and waited to ambush the Mary Celeste, hoping to claim salvage money. However, this scenario falls apart quickly. The Dei Gratia was a slower ship, making it virtually impossible to catch and overtake the Mary Celeste under normal circumstances. Some even proposed that the Briggs family might have been part of a deliberate disappearance scheme. Yet this theory crumbles when considering they left their 8-year-old son behind, something unlikely parents would do if planning to vanish. Pira tests seem an unlikely explanation as well. The valuable cargo remained untouched in the hold, and no signs of a violent encounter were present. While a sword was initially raised as potential evidence, it was quickly disproven. Over the years, increasingly bizarre theories emerged. These included underwater earthquakes or waterspouts suddenly hitting the ship. However, such events would either instantly destroy the vessel or pass quickly, leaving the crew aware they could remain aboard. An interesting twist came from an anonymous author in 1884 who claimed the ship carried passengers and that one went mad, killing most of the crew. This story turned out to be written by Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, and included the now common misspelling Marie Celeste instead of the correct Mary Celeste. Despite numerous speculative explanations, the true fate of the Mary Celeste and its crew remains an enduring maritime mystery. The mystery of the Mary Celeste continues to captivate people's imaginations. While wild theories about sea monsters, aliens, or Atlantis might sound entertaining, they distract from what likely happened. The ship carried 1,701 barrels of alcohol, loaded at Pier 50 in New York during cool weather. After leaving the harbour on November 7th, the vessel quickly encountered rough Atlantic storms. These storms caused significant movement of the alcohol casks and created atmospheric pressure changes. As the ship approached the European side of the Atlantic and entered the Gulf Stream, temperatures warmed. This warming triggered an excess of alcohol fumes escaping through cracks, leaks, and wooden barrel walls. Normally, sailors would open cargo hatches to ventilate during good weather, but during the storm, the Dei Gratia and likely the Mary Celeste were forced to keep these hatches sealed. The ship's log revealed multiple instances of bubbling in the cargo hold, indicating the crew's awareness of building fumes. Captain Briggs recognized the danger on the morning of November 25th when the weather briefly cleared. Seizing this opportunity, he likely planned to open the hatches and release the toxic vapors. A similar incident with the Julia AA. Halleck demonstrates how barrel friction can generate dangerous fumes. When ships eventually vented their cargo holds, The buildup of these potentially explosive vapors could create significant risks. Precisely what occurred aboard the Mary Celeste remains unknown. The witnesses are long gone, evidence has disappeared, and time has only made the story more mysterious. While we can piece together a plausible scenario, the complete truth will likely never be fully understood. The Mary Celeste's wooden hull groaned under the weight of accumulated alcohol fumes. These barely perceptible vapors were slowly expanding the vessel, causing it to creak and deflate as the fumes were released. For potentially 2 weeks, the cargo holds had been building up these potent alcoholic plumes. Captain Benjamin Briggs, a reasonable man with a cool temper who got along well with his crew, now faced a critical decision. With his wife and young daughter aboard, he wasn't going to take unnecessary risks. The situation was potentially dangerous. Oil lamps might flare wildly, and headaches could quickly overwhelm the crew. What might cause mild discomfort for an adult could be significantly more harmful to a 2-year-old girl. Ultimately, Briggs chose to launch the ship's boat. A portion of the railing was removed as they prepared to abandon the vessel. The boat was put into the water on the port side, with the ship's hull continuing to creak loudly. Those gathering supplies hastily opened the skylight, allowing the accumulated fumes to escape. They packed only the bare necessities, working quickly and with a sense of urgency. Some sails were dropped hastily, not even properly rolled up, though not all could be lowered given the time constraints. A 300-foot line was attached to the small boat, and the entire crew, the Briggs family included, climbed aboard, putting as much distance between themselves and the ship as possible. Their motivation was clear: escape the dangerous fumes and potential explosion. Shortly after their morning departure, archival weather reports indicate that rain squalls and winds quickly whipped up in the Azores region. The Mary Celeste's remaining sails still flew, a silent witness to the sudden and mysterious abandonment. The wind was blowing strongly against the crew, pushing them out into the open sea. If they had tried to row back to the speeding Mary Celeste, their boat would have been wrecked in the process. Attempting to reach the nearby island of Santa Maria, just 6 miles away, would have been futile. A lifeboat adrift stands little chance of being found, especially in that era. 2 decades earlier, the steamship Arctic disappeared into the North Atlantic fog with lifeboats full of passengers and crew, never to be seen again. The Mary Celeste's crew would have been hopelessly doomed. 8 to 10 days after abandonment, the Day Gracia discovered the ship drifting 378 miles east, flooded with nearly 4 feet of water through opened cargo hatches. The wind had turned the vessel completely around, sailing back toward the scene of the disaster that befell the 10 souls on board. The Day Gracia's crew brought the ship in, and the rest of the story is now known. This theory, originally suggested by Dr. Oliver Cobb, one of Briggs's relatives, seems the most likely based on the original evidence. It's realistic and practical, following Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation is often the most probable. As the investigation progressed, the Day Gracia's crew began to sense the court's suspicions. They started to elaborate on their stories, raising questions about their motivations. Were they genuinely recalling new information? Or were they attempting to deflect scrutiny by telling the court what they thought it wanted to hear? The Mary Celeste saga continued, with various intriguing developments. When Captain Winchester arrived in Gibraltar to reclaim his ship, he was presented with a hefty bill covering investigation, salvage, and numerous other expenses. While he accepted some costs like the salvage fee, he balked at paying for prolonged investigative work. Ultimately, the Day Gracia's crew received a 20% salvage fee based on the vessel's value. Investigations had uncovered unusual signs aboard, like a disassembled water pump and an improvised sounding rod on the deck. These findings suggested the crew might have panicked about taking on water. Though the ship never actually sank, the cargo remained largely intact, with only minor potential leakage. The court proceedings dragged on until March 1873, just before another maritime tragedy captured public attention. White Star liner Atlantic crashed near Halifax on April 1st, quickly overshadowing the Mary Celeste mystery. When the ship returned to New York in September, Winchester attempted to sell it, but its notorious reputation made finding a buyer nearly impossible. Eventually, Cartwright and Harrison purchased the vessel at a reduced price. For 5 years, she sailed primarily in the West Indies. In 1879, A particularly ill-fated voyage involved transporting horses around Africa, with most animals perishing. That same year, near St. Helena, her captain fell ill and died shortly after docking, the third captain to meet an unfortunate end. Wesley Grove became the next owner, but after 4 unprofitable years, he captain devised a plan to deliberately wreck the ship in 1884, ending its troubled maritime history. Parker, captain of the final voyage, had a dangerous plan: wreck the Mary Celeste and claim insurance money. The ship was overinsured at $25,000, yet carried only worthless cargo and spoiled liquor. Interestingly, this wasn't the first time Parker had been involved with the vessel. He had also captained her first voyage. When they set sail, Parker disclosed his intentions to the crew. Most crew members weren't initially part of the insurance scheme, but seemed to go along with it, believing the Mary Celeste was an inherently evil ship that needed destruction. Their original plan was to run the ship aground on Turks Island's rocky cliffs, but the first mate objected, arguing it would mean certain death. After some discussion, they agreed to instead wreck the ship on a nearby well-marked reef. The Celeste surged forward, sails billowing and sea spraying in her wake. Masts and beams creaked as the crew braced themselves for impact, racing onto the reef. Before abandoning ship, Parker allowed the crew to take the vessel's alcohol. In the chaos, he accidentally left behind the ship's logbook, which contained entries dating back to Captain Briggs. This log was ultimately lost as the ship crumbled into the sea. The details we know come from transcripts of the 1873 Mary Celeste inquiry. Parker sold salvage rights for $500 and filed insurance claims. However, the insurance company was suspicious. Their investigator discovered the cargo was merely rotten fish, rancid ale, and worthless items. Legal consequences followed swiftly. The owner and crew were brought to court and forced to return the insurance money to avoid imprisonment and potential execution for intentionally destroying a ship. But their legal victory might have been Pyrrhic. Within 6 months, the owner, captain, and first mate were all dead. 2 vessels were involved in the subsequent investigation, adding another layer of mystery to this already complex maritime tale. Spencer's Island, nestled in the Bay of Fundy, is home to the site where the infamous Mary Celeste was built. A stone cairn monument with a bronze plaque now marks this historic location. Local law suggests that after the ship was wrecked in Haiti and declared a total loss, original builders had the chance to repurchase her, but chose not to. For those interested in exploring the area, Local Guide Adventures offers tours, programs, and campouts right on the beach, where the old shipyard once stood. Visitors can enjoy paddleboarding and biking around the historic waters, then retire to comfortable wooden tents for the night. The vessel's remains lay hidden for years until 2001, when Econova and author Clive Cussler discovered what they believed to be the Mary Celeste's wreckage off the coast of Haiti, embedded in the same reef where she crashed. These artifacts now reside at the Age of Sail Museum in Port Greville, Nova Scotia. The collection includes deck nails, pieces of copper hull sheathing, and ballast rock. While it's challenging to pinpoint the exact origin of some fragments, visitors can still observe the wood grains and size of the recovered pieces. Just a short drive from Spencer's Island, the museum celebrates the rich shipbuilding history of the Bay of Fundy. It features comprehensive exhibits and a dedicated Mary Celeste display, making it a must-visit for history enthusiasts seeking an off-the-beaten-path experience. Interestingly, both ships chartered by the insurance company investigator were lost on their first voyage after the trial, with all hands gone. The Mary Celeste has since become synonymous with the concept of a ghost ship. More information can be found at Age of Sail, museum.car, or by following their Facebook page. On December 13, 1872, 150 years ago, a ragged, tattered brigantine limped into the ports of Gibraltar with a crew of only 3. These men had salvaged the Mary Celeste from the sailing ship Dei Gratia after finding the vessel adrift in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. What happened to the captain, his family, and the 7 other crewmen on board remains a mystery to this day. Ships vanishing without a trace aren't unusual. Some high-profile examples include the Collins Liner Pacific and the White Star Line's Neronic, alongside thousands of smaller craft now forgotten. Yet it's truly rare for an entire crew to disappear without any sign of struggle, leaving their ship intact and drifting. The Mary Celeste has captured imaginations for generations, its unusual circumstances, near-perfect condition, and strange extended career have made it the first ship people think of when they hear tales of maritime mysteries. For the 150th anniversary of the vessel's discovery, we're diving deep into its true story. Instead of repeating the standard ghost story, we're returning to original source materials. We'll trace the ship's history from its very construction, examining the full narrative of this bizarre and unlucky vessel. Over 150 years, the facts have become obscured by rumours and second-hand accounts. Our goal is to cut through the myths and reveal the genuine story behind this infamous ship. The tale of the Mary Celeste has been told and retold countless times, written and rewritten just as often. Yet, its mystery continues to fascinate, ensuring its place in maritime folklore for years to come. The Bay of Fundy tells a story of maritime heritage, where extreme tides and shipbuilding craftsmanship have long defined the region's character. From the early 1800s onward, over 1,000 ships emerged from these waters, primarily modes, coastal schooners that traversed local routes. Yet beneath this narrative of success lies a haunting mystery. Nearly 100 of these vessels have vanished without explanation. In 1860, Joshua Dewis, a native of Economy in Nova Scotia, was at the heart of this maritime tradition. As one of the early shipbuilders in the Minas Basin, he specialised in smaller schooners designed to transport goods between marketplace centres like Kentville and Parsborough. These vessels, typically under 100 tons, reflected the evolving shipbuilding techniques of the bay. Seeking growth and new opportunities, Dewis relocated from Economy to Advocate Harbour near Cape D'Or. Nearby Spencer's Island proved particularly attractive, despite not actually being an island, but a mainland town named after a nearby island. The location offered compelling advantages for a shipyard. Strategically sheltered from the storms that frequently battered Advocate, Spencer's Island sat on the protected side of Cape D'Or. Its most significant asset was its abundant timber. While Advocate's shipyards had already depleted surrounding forests, Spencer's Island remained densely wooded, with timber stretching right to the shoreline. Shipyard workers could hear lumberjacks harvesting wood as they constructed vessels. The community was tightly knit, with most residents connected through familial bonds. The woodlands were primarily owned by two brothers, Jacob and Isaac Spicer, who were local residents. As Dewis established his shipyard, the proximity of resources and the close-knit nature of the community created an ideal environment for maritime enterprise. Jacob Spicer and Joshua Dewis were brothers-in-law, their wives being sisters. Dewis persuaded the Spicers to invest in his shipbuilding venture, with the Spicers providing lumber in exchange for 1/8 ownership of the first vessel. In the fall of 1860, the keel was laid with plans to launch during high spring tides. The Spencer's Island shipyard was primitive and basic, located in what had become a comfortable community. The first vessel was entirely handcrafted during the harsh Nova Scotian winter. Without a mill to process timber, workers shaped trees into planks and beams using only axes and saws. Schematic plans were minimal, and the shipyard lacked designated crew accommodations. Instead, workers slept on the first floor of company executives' homes. Captain W.H. Bigelow, who owned a 16th share of the vessel, provided housing. Locals believed many shipyard workers lived in his house during construction. The home housed not just workers, but also the family and their maid. By early December, the ship's frame was complete, keel laid, ribs in place. It was left exposed to the winter elements to season the wood, allowing moisture to escape and strengthen the frame. During the workers' seasonal break, Dewis and the Spicers gathered materials for spring completion. When spring arrived, they finished the hull, coating it with salt to dry the wood before caulking and final preparations. Sails were imported from Halifax or Windsor. This first vessel from the Spencer's Island yard would become the infamous Mary Celeste, though she was originally launched as the Amazon, a name personally chosen by Joshua Dewis. Ships were typically referred to as female by their crew and builders, and this was the largest and most challenging ship Dewis had constructed to date. The Amazon, a brigantine with 2 masts, 2 deckhouses, and a square stern, stood 99 feet, long with a breadth of 25.5 feet, and a gross tonnage of 198.5 tons. She was one of the larger ships in the Bay of Fundy at the time, though not particularly remarkable in her construction. Her name might have been inspired by the Amazon women of Greek mythology, though this was never confirmed by her creator. The ship's stern proudly displayed her name and first port of registration, Parsborough, Nova Scotia, Her launching was smooth and uneventful, contrary to dramatic retellings that suggest complications. Spectators and owners alike insisted the ship slipped into the water without incident. The Age of Sail Museum in Port Greville holds posters from Spencer's Island vessel launches, which reveal the local traditions. A launch would typically be followed by an afternoon tea and a rummage sale. The shipyard at Spencer's Island would go on to build nearly 30 more ships over the years. Today, only remnants remain. Foundations of a pier from the late 1800s, where ships would unload goods, and the base of an old mill's piling. A few original buildings still stand, including the homes of Mr. Bigelow and Frederick D. Wolfe, the shipyard's blacksmith. Captain Robert McKellen, recently married, was to be her first captain. His initial voyage would take her to Five Islands, a town that, despite its name, was not actually an island. There, she was to be loaded with lumber for a transatlantic journey to the River Thames in London. This ship was meant to be the start of a successful shipbuilding industry in Spencer's Island. However, her launching would mark the beginning of a peculiar and remarkably unlucky maritime career. The Amazon's first voyage began with Captain McClellan, who believed the sea air would help his health. Shortly after loading the ship and setting out into the Bay of Fundy, McClellan developed severe pneumonia. The first mate immediately turned back, putting into Spencer's Island, where the sick captain was carried up the hill to the home of Jacob Spicer, one of the ship's owners. In a tragic turn of events, the young newlywed captain died quickly in the Spicer home, which still overlooks the old shipyard site today. His body was then loaded back onto the ship, which sailed to Economy, McKellen's home port. As the Amazon approached the wharf, the captain's bride rushed down to the shore, desperate to understand why the ship had returned so soon. The heartbreaking scene was etched into the crew's memory forever. Tragically, the Amazon's first delivery was the body of its first captain, brought home to his grieving widow. McClellan was buried in the nearby Economy Cemetery, where his grave can still be found. Captain Jack Parker took command, continuing the planned journey to London. Before crossing the Atlantic, the ship stopped in Eastport, Maine, at the Bay of Fundy's mouth, where it became entangled in fishing wires and was forced to anchor for several days for repairs. The subsequent Atlantic crossing was uneventful until the ship reached London. After discharging its lumber cargo and picking up a new shipment bound for Portugal, the Amazon sailed down the River Thames and into the Strait of Dover. There it collided with a British brig, which began to sink rapidly, forcing the crew to abandon ship. The Amazon stayed afloat, and the brig's crew was rescued and brought aboard. All survived the wreck, and the displaced sailors were dropped off in Dover, while the Amazon underwent further repairs. The cargo was eventually delivered to Lisbon, and by November 1861, the ship had sailed to Marseille. The earliest known image of the Amazon is a painting that captures this remarkable journey. The Amazon, a ship with a storied past, was allegedly painted by local maritime artist Honoré Pellegrin during its time in Marseille. For years, it sailed the Atlantic and Mediterranean, moving goods between the West Indies and home ports, often under the command of Captain William Thompson, returning to Nova Scotia. In the fall of 1867, the ship loaded corn in Baltimore and brought it to Halifax, docking along the waterfront. During Captain Thompson's command, the ship's owners from Spencer's Island grew increasingly dissatisfied. While docked in Halifax, they sent notice for Thompson to hold the ship, planning to replace him with a new captain. November brought notoriously harsh winter storms to Nova Scotia, particularly near Cape Breton. The Amazon's insurance policy explicitly forbade sailing in this region after November 1st due to dangerous conditions. George Spicer, one of the investor's sons and a former crewman, was promptly discharged by Thompson in Halifax. Thompson then sailed the ship without cargo to Cape Breton, anchoring near Big Glace Bay and waiting for a coal shipment. As anticipated, a strong winter gale reportedly drove the Amazon onto the beach. When Thompson reported to the owners that extensive repairs would be needed to refloat the ship, the insurance company refused coverage, citing the violation of their November 1st sailing restriction. With no viable options, the Nova Scotia owners abandoned the ship suspiciously quickly. Alexander McGean claimed the vessel and registered it to Sydney, Nova Scotia. This raised eyebrows because Nova Scotia law required a ship to be in seaworthy condition for such a registration. In a whirlwind of transactions, the Amazon changed hands multiple times, With its true condition shrouded in controversy, Captain Thompson had reportedly scammed the owners, setting up a dubious deal to sell the ship to McBee. This betrayal struck the Spencer's Island community hard, leaving them so wounded that they began referring to the Amazon as the ship that forced them to eat with tin spoon. Mac Bean quickly moved the vessel, selling it to John Beatty, who owned the ship for barely a year before it wrecked in Maine and was abandoned. The wreck didn't stay forgotten for long. It was recovered and towed to near W. York, where Richard W. Haynes purchased it at public auction for $1,750. Haynes faced a challenge when registering the ship. As a foreign vessel being imported to sail under the American flag, he was required to pay import duties. Instead of following the rules, he simply renamed the ship the Mary Celeste and hoped to avoid detection. When confronted about skipping the required fee, Haynes crafted an elaborate defense. He claimed to have completely rebuilt the ship, replacing the keel, stern, and most of the hull. His argument was that the repairs cost more than twice the original construction, essentially making it a new vessel. Historians have long debated the truth of his claims, with many skeptical of his story. The name Mary Celeste, meaning Heavenly Mary or Mary of Heaven, was Haynes' choice, though his reasons remain unclear, as Captain E struggled financially and within just 10 months the ship was seized in a sheriff's sale. James Winchester, a former sea captain, became the next owner. Interestingly, his life mirrored the ship's journey. Born in Nova Scotia, he moved to Eastport, Maine, became an American citizen, and eventually settled in New York City, which became the Mary Celeste's new home port. Winchester acquired the ship and soon found himself entangled in legal troubles. A deputy surveyor visited his office with an accusation that the previous owner had failed to pay import fees, rendering the ship's registration fraudulent. The surveyor suggested Winchester could avoid jail time by paying the fees immediately, a clear attempt at blackmail that Winchester promptly challenged. The survey escalated the matter and attempted to legally seize the vessel, but Winchester successfully fought the case in court. However, he soon discovered another significant problem. Haynes's claim of spending $8,000 or $9,000 on rebuilding the ship was far from reality. The Mary Celeste was actually in terrible condition, requiring a near-complete rebuild costing $11,500. During the extensive renovation, Winchester completely transformed the ship. He stripped it down to the waterline, added an additional deck, and modified its rigging. The ship's tonnage increased from 198 to 282 tons. These extensive repairs took a financial toll, leading Winchester to sell a third of the vessel to Benjamin Briggs, a Massachusetts captain who would become the ship's new commander. Briggs was quintessentially American, with ancestors who arrived on the Mayflower and fought in the American Revolution. This voyage would be his first and only crossing with the Mary Celeste. A devoted family man, he wanted his wife and family to join him on the journey. Sarah Briggs, his childhood sweetheart, would accompany him with their daughter Sophia, who was 2 years old. Their son Arthur, then 8, would remain behind with his grandparents to continue his schooling. In total, the Mary Celeste would carry 10 people on this voyage to Italy: Captain Briggs, Sarah, Sophia, and 7 crew members. The Mary Celeste sat at Pier 50 on the East River through October and into November of 1872. Preparing for her voyage to Italy, located at the foot of Barrow Street, the pier would later be renumbered during the early 1900s city rebuilding. The ship's crew was a mix of men from different backgrounds. Albert Richardson, the first mate, hailed from Maine. The second mate, Andrew Gilling, and cook Edmund Head were both from New York. Like Captain Robert McKellen, Head had recently married before the voyage. 4 able-bodied sailors from Prussia completed the crew. 2 were brothers, Volkert and Bos Lorenzen, alongside Arian Martins and Gottlieb Gaudschow. Captain Briggs thought them good sailors, though perhaps not the most intelligent. A ship's cat, affectionately called Poo by young Sophia, was also on board. The Briggs family had been living aboard while moored, making the vessel feel like home. They played music on their melodeon, wrote letters, and even entertained Sarah's brother and his wife. Briggs often thought about sending for his son, considering letting him skip school to join the voyage. The ship was loaded with 1,701 barrels of alcohol, carefully stowed in the hold. The barrels were laid on their sides, wedged with wood to prevent rolling, a necessary precaution as alcohol was a particularly dangerous cargo. with potential for dangerous fume buildup. On Tuesday, November 5th, the Mary Celeste was set to sail. However, winds and fog prompted Captain Briggs to anchor off Staten Island for 2 nights. During this time, Sarah wrote a final letter to her mother-in-law. 2 days later, with weather clearing, the ship raised anchor and set out into the Atlantic. Nearby, just a mile from Pier 50 in Hoboken, New Jersey, another ship waited, the Dei Gratia, similar in construction and sporting its own Latin name. Dei Gratia, her name meaning the grace of God, was also built on the Bay of Fundy, but on the south side, at Bear River, Nova Scotia. Unlike the Mary Celeste, the ship was still registered to Nova Scotia and crewed by local sailors under Captain David Morehouse. Though rumours suggested Captain Morehouse and Captain Briggs of the Mary Celeste were friends, this connection could never be confirmed. Departing Hoboken on November 15, 1872, with a petroleum cargo, the Dei Gratia set out 8 days and 1,200 miles behind the Mary Celeste. From the start, they battled rough seas and constant storms, keeping their hatches tightly sealed throughout the journey. The Mary Celeste would have experienced the same turbulent conditions, making steady progress despite the challenging weather. By November 25th, about 20 days into their voyage, the Azore Islands came into view. The journey was brutal. Rain pelted down, winds roared, and the ship creaked and groaned as it rode massive swells. 10 people aboard would have been tossed about, along with their volatile cargo. The Dei Gratia encountered similar storms, reaching the Azores in early December. While the Mary Celeste sailed south of the Azores, the Dei Gratia travelled north, with their paths eventually converging. On the afternoon of December 5th, Captain Morehouse spotted sails about 5 miles off the port bow. Something was immediately wrong. Through his glass, he saw no one on deck, particularly the helm. The sails were disheveled, and the ship drifted aimlessly. Multiple attempts to hail the mysterious vessel failed. Finally, Captain Morehouse ordered his first mate Oliver DeVoe, second mate John Wright, and seaman John Johnson to investigate. Johnson remained in the rowboat while the 2 mates boarded the vessel, finding the deck completely abandoned. The Dei Gratia approached cautiously, drawing close enough for the boarding party to row over. As they climbed aboard, an eerie silence greeted them. No sign of life, no explanation for the ship's condition. The discovery of the Mary Celeste reveals a haunting maritime mystery. First mate DeVoe approached the ship and immediately noticed something was wrong. Sails hung ragged and tattered, with signs they had been hastily pulled down. No one was aboard, not even the ship's cat. A portion of the port side railing was missing. DeVoe first checked the ship's pumps, which were functioning perfectly. Though 3.5 feet of water sloshed inside the holds, the cabins were completely soaked. Many deckhouse windows were boarded up and covered with canvas, suggesting the crew had prepared for stormy weather. Strangely, the cabin skylight remained. Ned propped open, likely the source of the widespread dampness. The beds told an intriguing story. The captain and his family's beds showed signs of recent use, but were unmade. Highly unusual for Sarah Briggs, who was known to make beds early in the day. Most chilling was the visible impression of the 2-year-old Briggs girl on her bed. Nearly all personal belongings remained on the ship. While the Lorenzen brothers' possessions were absent due to an earlier shipwreck, everything else was intact. The vessel carried ample food and water to complete the voyage, with only minor consumables missing from the first few weeks of travel. The ship's log provided the last concrete evidence, meticulously recorded until November 24. Contrary to sensational stories about perfectly maintained courses and hot meals waiting on tables, the actual evidence painted a more mysterious picture of sudden, unexplained departure. Within hours of discovering the Mary Celeste, Captain Morehouse and his crew were more interested in the potential salvage reward than the missing crew's fate. This suggested a lack of friendship between Morehouse and Captain Briggs. First mate DeVoe was convinced the ship was in near-perfect condition and could easily be sailed again. Morehouse agreed, leaving DeVoe in command with 2 men, navigational tools and spare provisions. By evening they had pumped out the ship and found replacement sails. DeVoe, now captaining the ghost ship, continued the ship's log and inadvertently erased Briggs's handwritten notes from November 25th. Another storm delayed their journey, and they waited an extra day before entering the Strait of Gibraltar, just 1 day after the Dei Gratia, repairing a derelict vessel at sea. sailing 600 miles through a storm. Safely bringing her and her cargo to port was an impressive achievement for a small crew of 3 men. Upon our arrival, the ship was immediately seized pending an investigation into the crew's disappearance. The Dei Gratia crew testified for their salvage rights. Like many others over the next 150 years, the investigators were baffled by a perfectly sound vessel abandoned mid-ocean with no signs of struggle or imminent danger. They launched a comprehensive investigation, naturally suspecting foul play, and thoroughly searched the ship from top to bottom. Their conclusion, the mystery remained unsolved. The Mary Celeste was found in near perfect condition, with a sword discovered under Captain Briggs' bed. Investigators initially claimed blood was present, but chemical tests revealed no traces of blood on the sword or anywhere on the deck. The sword was simply rusty. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged attempting to explain why this seaworthy vessel was mysteriously abandoned, with its entire crew vanishing without a trace. Murder quickly became a persistent speculation during the investigation. Some wondered if the owner, Captain Winchester, had hired the crew to kill Briggs and his family for insurance money. However, there was absolutely no sign of struggle, and no evidence supported this theory. Another theory suggested the Dei Gratia's crew sailed to the Azores and waited for the Mary Celeste, planning to capture her and claim salvage money. Yet this scenario falls apart quickly. The Dei Gratia was a slower ship, making an ambush practically impossible under normal circumstances. Moreover, no signs of conflict were present. Some speculated the Briggs family might have been complicit in their own disappearance. However, they left their 8-year-old son behind. Hardly the action of people planning to vanish permanently. Pirates were also considered, but again, the valuable cargo remained untouched in the hold. More outlandish theories emerged over time, including NG underwater earthquakes or waterspouts causing rapid flooding that might have panicked the crew. These explanations are not only far-fetched but would have been instantaneous events. The sword, often cited as potential evidence of violence, was disproven almost immediately after being found. Despite countless theories, the true fate of the Mary Celeste and her crew remains an enduring maritime mystery. The Mary Celeste's story begins with a mysterious voyage that captured imaginations worldwide. Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, wrote an anonymous fictional account in 1884 that mistakenly claimed the ship carried passengers who were killed, though this was entirely untrue. The ship left New York Harbor on November 7th, loaded with 1701 barrels of alcohol at Pier 50. Cool days had preceded its departure, with a brief stop at Staten Island before heading into the Atlantic. Soon after leaving, the vessel encountered rough storms that would prove pivotal to its eventual fate. These violent storms created significant challenges. The cargo of alcohol was violently thrown around in its casks, while atmospheric pressure fluctuated dramatically. When the ship entered the Gulf Stream and approached the European side of the Atlantic, temperatures began to rise. The warming conditions led to an unexpected development. Excess alcohol fumes began escaping through cracks, leaks, and even the wooden barrels themselves. Normally, sailors would open cargo hatches to ventilate during good weather. However, during storms like those encountered, the Dei Gratia and likely the Mary Celeste were forced to keep these hatches closed. The ship's log revealed occasional rumbling sounds within the cargo hold. What exactly happened next remains a mystery. The witnesses are gone, evidence has disappeared, and time has only made the story more complex. Some imaginative theories have emerged over the years, ranging from sea monsters to aliens to connections with Atlantis, but these are more amusing than credible. The most likely scenario involves the interaction between the alcohol, its storage conditions, and the ship's environment. Ultimately, the fate of the Mary Celeste remains an enduring maritime mystery. They might have been damaged, they might have taken on water, but they didn't sink, and the crew's true story will likely never be fully known. The morning of November 25th brought a break in the weather, and Captain Briggs was acutely aware of the alcohol fumes building up in the cargo hold. Taking advantage of the storm's pause, they opened their hatches to vent these toxic fumes. This wasn't an unusual scenario for ships of that era. The Julia A. Halleck, carrying a large petroleum shipment, experienced similar issues when barrels rubbed together, creating friction and generating fumes. When vessels vented their cargo holds, a great groaning would often echo throughout the ship. The wooden vessel would subtly inflate due to these fumes, and as they were released, the ship would creak and deflate. For the Mary Celeste, venting 2 or more weeks of accumulated alcohol fumes would have caused significant creaking and wailing, likely alarming the crew. Other effects were possible during this process. Oil lamps might flare wildly, and crew members could experience headaches and weariness. What might cause mild discomfort for an adult could be far more dangerous for a small child like the captain's 2-year-old daughter. Captain Benjamin Briggs, known for his reasonable nature and cool temperament, now faced a critical decision. With his wife and daughter aboard, he wasn't going to take unnecessary risks. His options were stark: place his family and crew in a small boat, or remain on the larger vessel, risking potential fume-related dangers or even an explosion. Ultimately, he chose to launch the ship's boat on the port side, removing a portion of the railing to do so. The hull continued to creak loudly as they hastily collected bare necessities. While gathering items, someone opened the skylight, further helping to release the accumulating fumes. They likely anticipated being in the boat for just a few hours, quickly dropping some sails in preparation for what they hoped would be a short, temporary measure. The Briggs family climbed aboard a little boat, with a line attached to the Mary Celeste. The entire crew joined them, putting as much distance between themselves and the ship as their 300 feet. Line would allow their urgent need was clear: escape the fumes and potential explosion. Some sails were simply dropped on the deck, not even rolled up. They didn't have time to take down all the sails. Shortly after the morning's break in weather, archival reports from the Azores show that rain squalls and winds quickly intensified. The remaining sails still flying could have caught the wind just right, propelling the ship at a rapid speed, and the crew in the rowboat would have been powerless to return. Their situation was dire. Battling against the wind, they would have been swamped by rough seas and rain. Attempting to pull themselves back to the speeding Mary Celeste would have wrecked their boat. Trying to row to Santa Maria, just 6 miles away,